Given that which we just heard from Professor Whitty, given the infection rates, given the hospitalisation rates, are you still comfortable with the great unlocking that is coming on Monday?
Well, you're right that infection rates are still rising, but the situation we're in at the moment is that around 80% of people have had their first vaccine and over 2/3 have had their second vaccine. And we know that we have weakened the link between the infection rates, the hospitalisations and deaths. And so now is a good time to loosen those restrictions, because if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it?
Well, perhaps in a few weeks' time, when more people have been vaccinated.
Well, we did wait. You will remember we were meant to be opening up on June the 21st, but the government made the decision to delay that to enable more people to be vaccinated. And we've beaten the target that we set for those second vaccinations by a week. And so now we are moving from legal restrictions to people taking personal responsibility. So when we are saying to people, do continue to be cautious, do take measures, but now we are just taking away those legal restrictions because of the success of the vaccine programme.
Medical experts in the British Medical Journal have been pretty scathing about the plans for July the 19th. They've claimed that the government's strategy of, as they describe it, infection over vaccination, unethical and unscientific. I just wonder if you have a response to the BMJ describing the government strategy as, again, unethical and unscientific.
Well, the government acts basing its decisions, its political decisions, based on scientific evidence. And what it's seen in this period coming up to July the 19th is that although infection rates are rising, the link between infections, hospitalisations and death is weakening. So if I give you some recent statistics, we recently, I believe this is yesterday, but the numbers might be slightly off, we had around 40,000 infections. We had around 500 hospitalisations and around 50 deaths. So there is, of course, all those hospitalisations are of concern, and even more so the deaths. But there is a significant difference between the number of infections and the translation into hospitalisations and deaths.
Well, actually, I mean, you were correct. I mean, the figures have changed slightly from that. Rather than 40,000, it was almost 50,000 new cases yesterday, the highest since January the 15th. Rather than 500 hospital admissions, as you said, it was 621. We've got 3,241 beds occupied compared with 2,209 last Wednesday. Things are getting bad very, very quickly, as Chris Whitty said.
I don't think that the Health Secretary has suggested anything otherwise than the infection rate is going to rise. And as a consequence of the infection rate rising, that means, because there is a link between the two, that it follows that hospitalisations and deaths will rise as well. But there are also consequences to not opening up, real consequences, not just to people's jobs and the economy, but to mental health as well. Also to people who haven't been going to the doctor because they fear it. There is and so it is really important that we get the balance right between ensuring that we keep this virus under control and we take the necessary clinical measures to do that, but that we also recognise there are consequences of not opening up and not allowing people to go about their daily lives.
Now, England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, he's warned that hospital admissions were doubling every 3 weeks. They could hit scary numbers. He could also, and he has also indicated that we could be going back down into lockdown measures within 5 weeks. Would you support a return to any kind of lockdown if those numbers did come true?
Well, what we've seen at the moment is infection rates are going up, and the Health Secretary has been very clear that infection rates could go as high as 100,000. But we are seeing a weakening of the link between infections, hospitalisations and deaths. And that's because of the vaccine. And so, as I said, as we get more vaccine rolled out, hopefully we won't see so many tragic cases turning into hospitalisations and deaths. But of course, the government keeps all these things under review.
Well, we hope that is the case, but let's go back to the question. Would you either support or fight against any further lockdowns?
I think we have been very clear as a government throughout the pandemic that we will look at the data, we will follow the scientific advice. As Chris Whitty said in the speech that you were referring to, we are a long way from where we were last March, and we now have a number of tools at our disposal. I've mentioned one, which is the vaccine. You've brought up another one, which is the pinging system and test and trace. But we also have genomic sequencing to identify the variant. You know, we all know about the importance of PPE. We've had masks. We know about the asymptomatic nature of the virus. So, you know, we have got some measures in play that can help control the virus. But of course, as I said, you know, we will look at everything at every stage. But we're hoping, we are relaxing the measures on Monday. And hope that the infection rates won't turn into those figures in relation to deaths and hospitalisations.
But Chris Whitty said this: I don't think we should underestimate the fact that we could get into trouble again surprisingly fast. Things could look a lot worse in 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks' time. That's the chief medical officer saying, in essence, that in a little over a month we could see restrictions coming back in, isn't it?
Well, he did say that matters could escalate, and of course that is true. But he also said, let's look at where we have come from, and let's look at also that we're not in the same place that we were when restrictions first went in. We have the vaccination programme, we have the genomic sequencing to detect new strains, we have the test and trace system, we are fully stocked with PPE and all those other things that we just didn't have when restrictions came in place. And the key to all this has been the vaccination programme, because we know that you're much less likely to get a severe illness if you are double vaccinated.
Sure, but I'll repeat the question. Chris Whitty saying, you know, in 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks' time, we may need to look at things again. That is the chief medical officer saying that in England, in a little over a month, we could see a return to restrictions, isn't it?
Well, I think the Health Secretary has been very clear, as has the Prime Minister, that we will see infections rise. But the reason why the restrictions are being taken away is because of the vaccination programme, which will protect people when those infection rates do rise. And of course, if we get into a situation where it's unacceptable and we do need to put back further restrictions, then that, of course, is something the government will look at. But, you know, we're going into the summer. A large number of people have been vaccinated. We've had a really tough time. We're still asking people to take responsibility. And we do need to ask ourselves, if we don't open up now, when will we be able to open up?
I was just speaking to Luke Johnson. He's arguably one of the UK's most successful entrepreneurs. And he said, why are we waiting till August for those rules to come in? If those rules are there, why don't we bring them in now? It's causing absolute chaos for businesses up and down the country.
You know, I understand the concerns for businesses and the frustrations that they feel. We have managed to vaccinate a large number of people. So 2/3 of adults have now had 2 vaccinations, and over 80% have had 1. And as time continues, obviously those numbers will go up. So as time goes on, more and more people will be protected, and that's why there is some delay to some of the measures.
COVID app, the NHS app, pinged 520,194 people in the week leading up to July the 7th. That's not sustainable, is it? We're already beginning to see businesses complaining about the fact that production lines are, in essence, you know, literally grinding to a halt.
Well, I understand people's frustration in relation to that, but we must remember it is an important tool, the self-isolation tool. But we have already announced, of course, that on August the 16th, again, the measures will change. And if you are fully vaccinated, you won't have to isolate, but instead take a test.
Let's take a look at some of that then. You're aware that 520,194 people were pinged in England. There's 700 people not turning up to build cars at the Nissan plant in Sunderland. Rolls-Royce are experiencing difficulties. Trains and buses are being cancelled because drivers aren't turning up. And some hospitals are being affected by staff shortages. And your government is going to move on the 16th of August. What's the date today, Solicitor General?
I understand.
I'll help you then. It's the 16th of July, so it takes your government a month to move. Why?
Look, I understand it is really frustrating. It's frustrating for people who are just going about their daily lives. It's been frustrating, I know, for school children who've had to self-isolate when someone in their class has a positive test. And it's also hugely frustrating for businesses asking their workers not to come in. I get all that. But we do have to take some measures.
You're not answering the question respectfully. I asked why is it taking a month?
So the answer to the question is that we have to take measures to ensure that we protect people. And we know that the virus doesn't have symptoms for everybody. And so the test and trace system is important. It's a part of the package of measures that we have brought in and have developed. And that will assist in keeping the infection rate down. And we know that will therefore assist in keeping hospitalisations and deaths down.
And on one hand, politically, you're trying to achieve what you said you wanted to, which was to give us freedom. But in fact, what you've done is you've pushed the problem into nightclubs and to people at the door, people who work within these organisations to enforce rules that you didn't want to leave in place. For good reason, by the way, and I support getting rid of them. But what you've done is you then put frontline workers in a very difficult position, because if you've been on the tube, you will see that some people choose not to wear face coverings even now. And it means that there are those who do and those who don't. And it's not being enforced. It's not being enforced properly. And it makes it difficult.
I do think it is appropriate to ask people to take personal responsibility. And yes, of course, I've seen people who aren't wearing masks, and there are some reasons why people don't wear masks and they're exempt. But I've also seen, as I've walked in parks and open spaces, people wearing masks where they're not legally obliged to do so. And I think what we've seen over the past year and a half is that the British people have been very respectful of those around them, have recognised that it's important if we want to keep the pandemic under control in this country. That there are measures they can take, and they are taking them.
We're waking up to headlines such as Britain is grinding to a halt, and you could even be pinged through your neighbour's wall. Obviously, action needs to be taken. What are you going to do? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, we're doing two things. As you may know, on the 16th of August, we are changing those rules in any event for people who have been double vaccinated.
Right.
And you won't have to isolate. You will be asked instead to take a test. And the government as well is looking at some pilots to see whether it would be possible, instead of having to self-isolate, whether you could take a test.
Do you think that they should get rid of the app?
I think that the app is a very important tool in relation to ensuring that people, can isolate and we deal with the pandemic. We must remember we are in the middle of a pandemic, and this is an important tool in order to keep infection rates low.
You say it's an important tool, but if it's lost the confidence of the public, which it clearly has, doesn't the government need to do a major piece of work to explain either why they're doing what they're doing, or alternatively to adapt it? Because test and trace has not had a good rap throughout. It's cost an awful lot of money, and it hasn't really been very effective for anyone, and confidence just isn't there.
Well, perhaps if I make clear, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and the virus doesn't always show itself. And so it is important to catch people who have been in contact with someone else, and they may not know that person has the virus. And that's why the test and trace is so valuable. I think everybody appreciates that. But the government is aware of this issue and has made some changes. So from August the 16th, if you are double vaccinated and you are pinged, you won't be required to self-isolate. You'll be asked to take a PCR test instead. And in addition to that, the government is doing some trials at the moment in businesses to see whether it works and still brings down infection levels to, instead of having to self-isolate, you take a test instead.
The only thing that is going to happen when we relax restrictions is that more people will be getting pinged. 500,000 in the week to July the 7th. One wonders what it's going to be in a couple of weeks' time, perhaps reaching into the millions.
Well, as I said, it is an important tool because it is important that you do isolate if you've come into contact. I know this is something the government is looking at. In addition to the changes in mid-August, the government is also carrying out a number of pilots to see whether instead of isolating once you get pinged, you could take a test. So the government is looking at this very, very carefully, recognising the significant impact that is having on businesses.
Frazer, we are asking people to exercise their own judgment. We're asking people to go slowly. But we've got 140,000 people pitching up at Silverstone this weekend.
Well, there are some large events, and of course there are measures in relation to those large events. But what I've seen over the course of the last year is people taking a huge amount of personal responsibility, not always just abiding by the rules, but going beyond the rules. I've seen people, outside wearing masks where they don't have to, and there are different restrictions in different places for different reasons, and of course the measures will be changing on next Monday.
Bring the infection rate down. Do you think that's what the Euros achieved?
I know that there's been specific events where there have been a large number of people and measures have been taken, protection measures. There are rules.
I'm sorry,
in
this
relation
just doesn't add
to
up. You're a very,
tests.
very smart and well-educated woman. On the one hand, you're saying the government's doing all it can to protect us, and you're striving to do that, and you want to keep infections down. And the next day, well, not now, but a few weeks ago, we were watching 60,000 people at a football match. These two, I don't need to spell, these two don't add up, Mrs. Frazer.
Well, there have been a number of events, sporting events throughout the country, very important events for the British people. We've had Wimbledon, we've had the Euros, fantastic result for the British team, almost, in relation to the Euros.
Well, I was watching the England team, but clearly you're watching a different one. Do go on.
Well, I think they did fantastically to get as far as they did, and I think they did a fantastic job.
Yeah, we're not talking about
but,
that. We're talking about 60,000 people and probably more. It does mean that in one instance, a 12-year-old girl has been visited by the Riot police in Manchester to check that she was quarantining. Does that make you proud to be British?
Well, obviously that's an independent case. The police are taking action.
Do you support that?
And I can't comment on the particular case. The police do follow up in relation to ensure that people are following the rules.
Do you support a 12-year-old being visited by the Riot police in Manchester? Just a yes or no on that'll do.
Well, you're actually asking me two contradictory things. You're saying, please don't have these mass sporting events because they're spreading infections.
I'm sorry, a 12-year-old in her front room is not a mass sporting event, Solicitor General. I'll try again. Do you support the Riot police visiting a 12-year-old girl in Manchester to see if she's self-isolating?
Well, obviously, the facts of that case look like it's disproportionate, but I don't know the detail of the case, and I know that the police are looking into it.
Okay. On Monday, hopefully, England, and one day the United Kingdom starts back to whatever the new normality will be. What will you be expecting your staff to do, indeed you to do, as regards the wearing of masks, Solicitor General?
Well, I can talk about what I will do, and what I will do is I will wear a mask where it is appropriate to do so. I'm looking forward to not having to wear a mask in all circumstances.
You and me both, and the Duchess of Cornwall. It's an ever-growing army we're looking forward to it. Yes.
And many people, but I will wear a mask where I've been asked to do so, for example, by a mayor, whether that's my own mayor in Cambridgeshire or whether it's the London mayor when I'm here in Westminster. I will wear a mask if I think it's appropriate because other people are uncomfortable that I'm not, and I will respect that position, or whether I'm with vulnerable people in a crowded place where the risk of infection is high.
All right. The police or other authorities are also trying to track down whoever might have been responsible for leaking video footage of your former senior colleague Matt Hancock. Do you support that action?
I do think that where people have breached security rules, it is appropriate to investigate. But again, that investigation is ongoing.
Right. Is there not a public interest case, though, concerning the former health secretary?
You mean, is it appropriate that we as public citizens are aware of matters affecting the lives of our public figures? Is that the question?
Yes. Is it appropriate that the man who was in charge of telling all of us to stay at home, not to hug, whatever it might be, was in fact hugging one of his colleagues while we were paying for that, of course, and might even have been involved in the hiring of her in the first place? I think that's in public interest. Solicitor General, do you?
I think that those matters having been brought to the public attention, it was right for Matt Hancock to resign, and that's why he did resign. Absolutely.
No, but we've moved on now. We've moved on now. We now have the Information Commissioner searching people's homes, looking for the individual or looking for other information. I'm asking, do you support that? This story was in the public interest, wasn't it?
Well, that's the Information Commissioner is looking into it. That's a matter for the Information Commissioner. But as a general principle, of course, if there are particular rules in relation to security, in relation to confidentiality, it's also important that those are protected.
But you do support this was in the public interest. I'm sorry, I'm going to labour this point a little with you, Solicitor General. You do support this story was in the public interest, don't you?
Well, what I do support is the principle that when politicians
Let's
take
try one last
inappropriate
time.
action,
Is this
there are
particular
consequences.
story in the public interest, Solicitor General? It really is a yes or a no.
Well, the investigation is ongoing. It's
No,
ongoing.
don't worry about the
by
investigation. I'm not asking you to
Information
comment on the
Commissioner.
investigation. I'm asking the initial story. It was in the public interest, wasn't it, Solicitor General?
Well, I think you're asking me to comment on an investigation.
No, I'm not.
This is
What don't you?
ongoing, and
I don't want to comment on. Let me make this absolutely plain. I don't want to comment on the investigation. Not interested. Please, the initial story. Don't worry about the investigation. The initial story. It was in the public interest, wasn't
Nick,
it?
I think what
Solicitor
you're
General?
asking me to say is, what are the appropriate measures for
No, I'm not.
journalists to take in order to break stories?
No, I'm just asking, do you think it was in the public interest?
And I'm not, in relation to one case, going to make a general statement. In relation to the general issue, I'm not going to make a statement about one particular case which is
Why?
under investigation.
No,
at the moment.
I'm not asking for the investigation. I'm just asking whether the initial story. This is the last time. You're honestly, as Solicitor General, you're unable to tell my listeners whether this story is in the public interest. You just don't have a view.
I have been really clear. And what I have said is that the behaviour of Matt Hancock was inappropriate, and as a result of that, he resigned.
All right.
Statute of limitations that is being introduced to deal with prosecutions relating to actions during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. All 5 political parties in Northern Ireland are opposed to this. The Irish government is opposed to this. Provisionals on both sides are opposed to this. Is it time for a rethink?
So the issue in relation to this is that as time moves on, the chances of getting successful convictions gets lower. And I know that this issue is causing a lot of issues in Ireland, and it is important that we engage on this subject. And the rifts are developing, and I know that the government is engaging with all parties. It will continue to do so before it brings forward any legislation.